Hey, Phil Brown here with another video on Fusion 360. This time we're going to build a vise with SoftJaws that are all controlled by parameters. The idea here is if you set this up once, you're actually going to speed up your setup process in the long run when you have to custom manufacture your own SoftJaws. So the first step I did is I went ahead and brought in this Kurt vise from their website, downloaded easily as a step file. As you can see here is I have my bodies and everything just like my other vise if you've watched it with parallels. Let's go ahead and the first step we want to do, let's remove this vice jaw here. So we're going to get rid of the original steel jaws. And one thing you notice as soon as I hit the delete key or right click delete, my entire model has disappeared. Well, that has occurred because my timeline is currently turned on. So let's actually go ahead and back that up. You could use the undo key as well as Control Z on your keyboard will also do the same thing. So let's get that turned off. So now we're going to go ahead and turn that off. It's obviously giving me a warning that I'm turning it off. However, if we repeat this same process, you can see I could delete that body out of there as well as this other one and not have any design issues. So my next step is I know it seems a little backwards, but is to go ahead and turn on that capture history. So from this point moving forward, we have everything documented and tracked. So personal preference, what I always like to do is now convert all my bodies. So if I click my first one, hold down the shift key, click my last one, and then go ahead and right click on there. So we're going to create components from bodies. And the reason we need to do this is so later when we add our joints, it makes everything easier and you don't have any issues or errors. So one next step I like to do is create two new components because we're going to group things. And that first group is going to be my base. And again, this is going to look very familiar to what we did on the vise with parallels. So again, is now I have my base, my jaw. I'm going to go ahead and activate my top level. And then let's go ahead and reorganize these. Again, because these are components, you could just click on what you want and move them out of the way. So visually, I can see here, I got my jaw, my slider, a couple of bolts, and then actually that nice little plate they put in there that allows you not to get chips in the bottom. You can keep this. You could have deleted this in the beginning as well if you felt necessary. Now holding my control key, I'm going to go ahead and double left click each one of these parts. And what you can see is because I'm holding the control key, it allows me to click multiples, as well as I can now highlight them all on the left and click and drop those all inside a jaw. So you are going to get a warning message. This is saying, hey, things have moved around. I like to hit continue, so it places them all back where they were originally. And then just go ahead and turn off that jaw to confirm what's going on. One extra step here that you could do while you have this open and active is create a rigid group. And then that rigid group is going to just be the jaw in total and hit OK. So now if you actually move one piece, everything's going to move all together. And then again, as you could either capture position or you could revert the position back. Control Z on your keyboard also is another shortcut to go back one step. So let's kind of repeat this process for everything in the base. This time again, as I can click either the first or the last component, hold down shift and pick the other corresponding one, drag everything and drop it into my base folder. And then one last time, let's do another rigid group on that entire base. So again, is now if you think to yourself, if you could take both models and move everything at once, you're correct. If not, you may need to circle back and touch up on a few things. The only other thing that I want to do here is let's go ahead and ground this base. So the idea here is with this base, once it's grounded, you have that freedom to actually go in and do different things. So as you can notice here, I can't ground the base at that assembly level because there's too many components inside of it. However, again, you can cheat the system, double click the bottom, and then just go up to ground. In this case, it's off my screen, so I can't actually see it. So let's go ahead and just right click a little lower on my screen and then see ground. So with that being ground, you should not be able to move the bottom in any way, shape, or form. However, you should be able to move the top. So that being said on both of these items, let's go ahead and add a little bit of motion here to make life easier in the long run. So I like to turn off the base, create my joint. In this case, I'm going to say, let's go inside of this bore. And we're going to go ahead and make that motion to our base. So let's go ahead and turn off our jaw. Again, you're going to notice where I click these two. In this case, it just made motion on the shaft. Let's go ahead and turn this back on and then switch to motion. So again, currently it's a rigid joint. We're actually going to make this a sliding joint. And then you may need to adjust the axis depending on what's going on. So again, that animation there, you should see that one component moving back and forth, and you can hit OK once you have that set. So if everything works properly, when you try to move this body, it should function almost as a normal vise in general. And again, wherever you release this, you're going to see that it's going to ask me again to capture that position or revert it. So I use Control Z. So now with all of this stuff set inside of my part and my model, let's go ahead and create those jaws in themselves. So I'm going to save this file, and in this case, go File, Save As. Personal preference here is just so that I don't lose that original copy, and we can label this SoftJaws. So once you have that file saved, you're going to notice that it goes to the folder where it is, and we have version 0. So let's open up a new file here. So in this file, what we're going to do is we're going to create those SoftJaws. So one way to get your actual dimensions on SoftJaws is to bring up Kurt's website. In this case, we're looking at DX6 Kurt Vise dimensions. And down here in this view, we could actually find our hole centers, what actual tap size we have here, and then hole spacing from the bottom up, as well as B, which is overall jaw length, but that's not something we're going to worry about because we want that adjustable in the long run. So we could pull our dimensions here. We're 0.94 up to center from bottom. We're 3.875 between centers. And in this case, it's a half 13 bolt that they're utilizing. So if we go back to Fusion 360 now, we can go ahead and sketch that jaw out. Me personally, I like to sketch everything in one view and have everything in the same area, and you'll see why when we get to extruding. So here we could go ahead and go create rectangle, as well as if you guys don't know, if you push R on your keyboard, creates a rectangle. And let's start with a 2x6 jaw. So again, as I'm just typing that in, and I'm also pushing tab to jump from one to the other. And then from here, let's create our center line. So again, let's use L on the keyboard, or you can go to the top, and then you have construction line here. X on your keyboard also toggles that feature. So we want a constraint from midpoint up to midpoint. And then from here, I'm going to hit X again because we want to get rid of that construction line. So now C for circle. Pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and drop a couple circles in here. And then now I'm going to hit D for dimension, and let's dimension everything. So again, as if you remember correctly, center of the circle to this line is 3.875 divided by 2. And the reason we're dividing by 2 is because obviously we're going to use that line to mirror across. Another dimension we already know is from center of our circles to the top is 0.94, and we could have that dimension input as well. Few other dimensions here I'm going to add. In this case is 0.9 is going to give me clearance for that socket head bolt. I know a lot of people out there probably know there's an exact dimension for this. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and set this as 2 dimensions that are simple, and I know it's going to clear my 1/2-inch threads and my socket head. So with those few dimensions set, let me go ahead and move this one in case you're watching and you want to see that dimension. Again, all I did was click and drag that dimension down, and you can move these dimensions around to make it a little easier to see what you're doing. Again, here we go in this 550. Let's go ahead and cant that dimension. And this is just for visual representation and getting us familiar with the sketching area. So now that we have that all set, something to keep in mind here, because the fact that we're actually fixed here at our origin and we measured up from there and then out from our center midpoint allows us to adjust this jaw as we go. So again, I changed that 3-inch dimension, and I'm going to do this so when we move these jaws over into our model, we don't confuse which way we are from center. So now that we have this set, let's go ahead and create a mirror, and we're just going to mirror over the 2 sketches we made for circles, and then we're going to mirror that across our construction line. So once you have that set, go ahead and hit OK, and you could finish up this sketch. So I like to look at this isometrically personally when I do my extruding, as well as you can hit extrude at the top or E on your keyboard, but we're going to go ahead and extrude out all 3 of these surfaces here, and we're going to go to 1 inch to start. And go ahead and hit enter. You could also click OK, and then we need to turn on that sketch one last time. So this time it's going to get a little funky. We're actually going to do an extrude, and let's go ahead and flip our isometric view. And we're going to actually grab those 2 surfaces to create our countersinks for those socket head bolts. So one thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to say let's do 2 sides, And then on top of that, we're going to go for that first side to object. That object is going to be that backside face of our part. As you can see, we're now extruded to that face. The reason again for this is when we change thickness, we want that counter bore to change automatically. As well as we're going to go ahead and say we're going to do this one as distance. I can click this guy and I could say negative 0.2, for example. So if you get a little better view on this, and you should be able to see this if I get this rotated around, we're going to go 0.2 from here. So we have somewhere for that bolt to rest, as well as we're going to basically counter bore down to that same thickness. Again, these two things are set, not necessarily set in stone. You're free to adjust this as much as you want as you go. This is just to give you a basic idea of what's going on. So in theory, we have our SoftJaw totally set for what we're doing, and we could save this as a SoftJaw template. So again, let's save this, SoftJaw. In this case, I cannot type, so here we go, SoftJaw, and we have that saved. So let's go back to our model we started creating. We can go ahead and open up our data panel, and we can bring in that SoftJaw now. One thing you're going to want to do as soon as you get this in here is break the link. And again, the reason is because we want to fully be able to adjust this inside of this actual model. So all I'm doing here is kind of positioning this so that I can go ahead and move it over to my part and put it in place with a joint. So again, like I said, we're going to break this link. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do a copy, and then you're actually going to want to paste this as a new. Again, if you do not paste as new, if you have an odd shaped part and it's not symmetrical, if you extrude from one jaw, it's going to do identical to the other jaw. So again, the idea here is you want to do paste new, and we're going to set up our parameters so when we control the outside of our stock, it's automatically going to adjust both. So again, paste new is the key element here, as well as you may want to actually place those two components inside the corresponding folder as well. So all I'm doing is clicking and dragging these into those two folders. In this case, again, it's looking at some motion that happened. I'm just going to go ahead and hit continue, so it places that SoftJaw inside of my stock area. So let's start with the base. So we're going to go ahead and turn the jaw off. You can see here I have my base all set, and now I have the freedom to align this a couple different ways. In this case, I'm going to do a joint. Make sure you have this set to rigid at first. It's going to make your life a little easier and not confusing. And then let's go between two faces. So I want to align this face here and this face here between these two faces on this one. So again, I could pick this face as well as this face, and now it's basically asking me for a snapped point. So it's up to you what snap point you use to get this set and working in the way that you want it to do. So again, as you could pick whatever point you want. I prefer to use top or the back side bottom on my jaw, and then I'm going to use front side bottom on my vise. So again, is now with those two set in stone and locked together, we have our first jaw placed. You can also take a couple views here to look at the referencing. In this case, it does sit a little higher than may needs be on that actual plane. And you can actually leave it there, or you could move it more if you like. It's really up to you. The same thing goes here is you can actually align from a couple different points. So in this case, I could say, you know, maybe I want to go off of center of this circle and do the same thing on my jaw. So again, let me get flipped around here so this looks a little nicer. And now we can go ahead and we could reference that same idea down here. So again, as if I pick center of that bore, it's automatically going to move me to center of the two holes. And now I can look and you see how this vise jaw is sitting down there flat. Once you have that configured, you can go ahead and hit OK. And to make sure everything's functioning properly again, let's go ahead and try to move some stuff. And you can see you can't click and drag that jaw out of the way. So we're going to go ahead and turn off that joint to make sure that we can't see it. And then we're going to go jump down into our jaw. So let's turn our jaw back on. We're going to turn the base off. And now we can actually set this joint. So again, I like to look at this a little more isometrically. Let's do a joint. This joint, again, between two faces. It's up to you which joint you use. I like between two faces because it guarantees this jaw stays on center, as well as being able to pick that actual bore that I made. So there's my backside selection between two faces one more time on my moving jaw. And then we're going to go ahead and pick our whole reference. So now with those two set, the only problem I'm having is you can see that my part is actually backwards. So if you scroll down, you could go ahead and do a flip. In this case, that's not quite working. However, I can spin this also 180 degrees. So again, looking from a side angle, your part should be hypothetically sitting perfectly flat on that bottom lip of that jaw. So once you have everything set and put into place, we can hit OK and turn everything back on. And then we're going to activate the top level. So again, we're looking here, and the idea is if you did this properly, when you move that jaw, your vice jaw should move simultaneously. As well as, let's go ahead and turn that joint off so that we don't have to look at it, and then our main joint as well. So if you go ahead and hit revert, we're going to put everything back to the way it was, and everything should now be functionally and stationary. So the one last thing I personally like to do, and I do this under the base folder, is I create one new component, and that new component's basically going to be the increment of measure between my two jaws. So again, right click on that base, go ahead and create a new component. In this case, you can't see it there. However, I could always go to the top and say create new component, and then I can label out that component. So I like to just call this one spacing, and I have that ability right there. So once we have everything selected, and again, the parent body is gonna, or the parent component, so to say, is actually gonna be my base. So again, now we have spacing here. We're just gonna create a very simple box. And in this case, I really suggest you put this on any plane that you want. It's not really gonna affect anything, but to make life easy, I have a tendency to put it on my plane that I'm kind of working off of. So we wanna do a 1-inch by, let's say 2 inches to start, and then we're gonna go 1 inch tall. So again, is all I'm doing here is using enter key to move through things quickly, and then we could go back and activate our base. So at this point, the only thing left that we have to do is create a joint, and that joint is gonna be between, middle, top, dead center of this guy, and then we could go back over here and go middle, top, center of this. I mean, it's up to you which way you go about this. I also really like the idea of going on this actual body here, bottom center. And the reason is because if I set my origin to the top center of my spacing block, I can control basically how deep in my part goes all automatically. So again, we're just looking for a very simple rigid joint between those two. And again, once you have that placed, you can go ahead and take a look. We're going to spin this around a little bit, and then we're going to repeat this process one more time. We're just going to activate the top level. So again, we're going to do a joint. This one's going to come from this face. If you ever have any problems selecting things, a quick trick here is you can hold down the control key and move all across that face. So again, as before, is if I let go of that control key and as I get to other bodies, weird things start happening. Start by getting your mouse highlighted on there, hold down control, and then move to the point that you want to on that face. In that case, I want to take that point, and then again, we're going to go to this face, hold control to that point. So if you have everything set at this point, when you hit OK, my moving jaw is going to automatically slide up, and now I have spacing set. So again, personal preference here. The last thing I like to do is just go into where that component is and just turn it off, because visually I don't need to see that part. Again, I have the ability to control that point as much as possible. So now that we have everything modeled and hypothetically speaking functioning, let's go ahead and start playing around with our parameters. So I'm going to go modify, change parameters. And now once I have this parameter table positioned and scaled down to a reasonable size so I can go ahead and adjust what I'm doing, I have the ability to go ahead and do that to this part. So here, a couple things I actually want to control, as we talked about, is one, my jaw height and my jaw length. So again, as if you remember here, we have that 3 and 6 inches from before, as well as maybe my jaw length. So let's start with a couple parameters that we can make our own. I'm going to go ahead and say jaw H for jaw height, and we're going to go ahead and type in that 3 inches. As well, let's make another one, jaw width, and whatever our width was. This time we're actually going to go 2 inches to make some change as we go. And then one last one's going to be jaw depth, or however you want to say. We got jaw height, jaw width, and then, jaw depth. And then in the case of this, let's go ahead and do a depth of, 1.5. One mistake I already made here, as you can see, is if I go for a jaw width of 2 inches, it's hypothetically not going to work. So let's change that to 8 inches. So again, now that we have those 3 dimensions set, we can actually plug those in directly here. So one thing, for example, our jaw width, I can go ahead and type in JAWW, and then our jaw height, JAWH. And then one last thing that we want to do is if you scroll down to where that extrude is our jaw depth, JAWD. So again, as I'm typing these in, you may notice that my model's automatically updating. However, now that we did one jaw, this is where we actually have the ability to control both jaws. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my second soft jaw here, and let's go to that sketch. Again, we're just going to repeat that process. So we have jaw width, JAWW, jaw height, JAWH, and then the last thing we're going to go ahead and change is the extrude. So again, the whole idea here is both of these are now going to be identical. And with that being identical, however, when I extrude a component or a part, nothing bad is going to happen. So again, you can adjust these out. Remember how I said we can go to 2-inch jaws. You can now bring it back to a 6-inch jaw, and maybe they're 1 inch tall. So this is the nice thing here with this parameter setup. The last thing I would like to do is actually bring in that box that we created for spacing. Again, the idea here is the last thing you may want to control is that ability to actually set the spacing between the jaws. I really like this feature because I could always set a easy number and put my 1, 2, 3 blocks in there. So in this case, we're going to say jaw S for spacing, and let's go ahead and change this to 5 inches. So when we plug it in, we get a dramatic change. So go ahead and find where you put that 2 inches in. In this case, it should be under spacing if you labeled everything correctly. And we're going to go ahead and say jaw S. And with that parameter set, as soon as you click away, you're going to see that automatically spaces out. I know one thing I did say to you guys is I like to do is be able to control a few different things outside of that. So if I turn that spacing on, I can now determine which one of these guys is actually controlling my height here. So in this case, that's actually my width, and I'm just doing this very quick to be able to type in a few things. And again, it's up to you. You can add this if you want, but I like to say, you know, part depth. So I'm going to just say part D here. And then if I say this is 1 inch, I now have the ability to create an expression here. So in the case of this, I want to control this depth, but I actually want to take a couple of dimensions here. So we're going to take jaw height minus part depth. And again, as soon as I hit OK, what you're going to see is that block is going to change. In this case, it's actually not because we have it set to 1 inch. And in this, I also hit OK by accident. So let's go back to that parameter table, and let's go ahead and do a little changing here. So if I change my overall height of my jaw, automatically my jaw depth, or actually my part depth, is going to carry over to that 1 inch. Again, this is just a little something extra. You don't have to do this by all means. As well as one thing I also learned is if you just go ahead and favorite these, you kind of simplify guaranteeing that somebody can't go in and change the wrong thing because you only have these 5 variables at the top. So one last thing again, let's clean this guy up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my spacing. That way visually it's not there unless I need to. As well as we could go ahead and move everything to our origin. So again, as my origin is down here, and depending on how you touch off and how you set up your parts, I'm actually going to move my origin so my Z, X, and Y are all in the proper position, as well as I want to position this so it's at my part depth. So again, we turn on that spacing block, and now we can go in and we could actually unground this component. And the whole idea here, again, is so that you have that freedom to be able to go in and move this. So if we unground this, and then we're going to do a joint from top dead center of this guy here, and we're going to actually do this off our origin. See how it's a little tricky for me to select where we're going? Even if I manipulate my body, I might be able to get there. So sometimes it's easier if you just turn off the base altogether to get to that face and set to that point. So again, we're going to turn that base back on so we can see which way our block goes. And in this case, our block is hypothetically upside down currently. So let's go ahead and flip that guy. And then if you look, we actually have X to the left, Y to the right. So depending on how this moved, it will demonstrate exactly how it's going on. So as well, you can always come back here and adjust this. So I went ahead and hit OK just to see where my placement is. In this case, my X and my Y are off, and I can actually go to my timeline and edit that. So the last feature I did was that rigid. Let's edit that joint. In this case, it came down and it placed itself, and we actually want to spin one way or the other. So I'm going to start by going 90 this way, hit OK. X is now correct, Y is obviously off. Actually, we're backwards on both, so I can edit that joint one more time. In this case, we actually went positive 90. Let's go negative 90 and finish this up. So again, let's get reoriented here. So this kind of looks like we're going into our machine. And now what I'm looking here is I have my Y-axis going outwards and my X-axis to the right. And if you're somebody that uses a horizontal machine at all, you're going to actually want to go completely the opposite way where I went negative 90, go positive 90, because you want your vise handle up. So now with this, everything just being set, we have everything right. I like to go back, turn off my spacing block. Let's go ahead and turn off the origin so we don't see that when things happen. And let's hit save. So again, I really use milestones as I go in this process. I can go ahead and call this final. And the reason for that is I know everything's set, as well as if somebody accidentally modifies this model, I have a set point to come back and actually recover it from so that I don't have any issues as I go. So again, final copy. It's up to you what you put. You don't have to put what I'm putting. The nice thing is here is when you go back and take a look is we have just that. So I have my milestone created here. You're going to see in a second this is going to save as well. And then it also has a milestone. So one thing to keep in mind here, guys, is if you guys haven't checked it out yet, this is my original stock model that I built off my Kurt vise. So feel free to go check out that video. It should be in a link popping up shortly.